So we talked about the principles and strategies. Now let's talk about the tactics. The first tactic is ensuring restraint. So in the tactics, to implement the strategies which are based on the principles, you need tactics. So you have two tactics: restraint and law. Restraint is something, let's say we do it ourselves, like curbing consumption. And this raises again the issue of population. And as you know from my previous podcasts, I'm a little bit uh, uh, different from others in how I think about population as a part of climate change problem. I'll come back to that again. But this chapter, in fact, the author clearly mentions that consumption has to be considered along with population as well. So that's consistent with what I think as well. So here is the consumption raising livestock on a large scale in factory farms like this one contributes to climate change, both because pigs and cows emit methane and because rainforests are destroyed to grow crops to feed these animals. So industrial production of meat, from chicken to pigs to beef, and of course pork and beef, also aquaculture for fish, finfish and shellfish and so on, are all very efficient at consuming huge amounts of resources to fatten up the meat and produce large quantities, but they're also very bad for emissions and pollution. Okay, so obviously there are cultural aspects of consuming meat, and there are protein requirements and so on. So restraint has to somehow come from realization of all these dimensions of climate change, right? The disparities, the morality, the ethics, and so on and so forth. Nonetheless, as for population, I will repeat some of the points we made in the earlier chapters. If we look at this chart, the top 10% of the richest people, or top richest 10% of the people, emit almost 50% of the CO2 by the entire population, and the poorest 50%, about 3 billion that we talked about before, they're responsible for only about 10% of the total lifestyle consumption. Okay, emissions from lifestyle consumption. Okay, some details there, but nonetheless, the majority of the emissions come from the richest 10%. Starting with that, what exactly is the problem with population then? Obviously, we have grown very quickly, super exponentially, to 7 billion, and the planet obviously cannot afford to continue to have growing population, and projections vary. Some projections say we will reach 10 or 11 billion by 2050, and some say we are headed to an empty planet because educating women means they have fewer and fewer kids. Okay, but the additional tricky information there is that women who have fewer kids provide more resources to each kid, which inevitably leads to increased consumption. So just because someone has fewer kids and wanting to reduce population, or having fewer kids because they are educated, doesn't mean that they're actually reducing climate change or impacts of climate change, and so on, environmental impacts, right? So if we look at the CO2 emissions per capita now, these are the numbers in tons per person per year. US is there at 16 and a half. China is here. UK is here. China is here at 7.5, and India is down here at less than 2, which is now this is a bit old already, 2017. This continues to increase because India wants to grow and is growing economically. COVID has slowed things down, but obviously it'll bounce back up, hopefully. But also this is an average over the top 10% within India, who have a probably much higher carbon footprint, and very poor people who have very low carbon footprint. Okay, so the point is, just saying population increase is a problem in the context of climate change is not very accurate. Consumption is the main issue, because even the reducing population is now coming with increased consumption per person in those families which are nuclear and have fewer members. Okay, so the total fertility rate drops as the percentage of girls enrolled in secondary school goes up. You can see there's clear data for this. This is great news. You just educate women, give them more freedom to discuss family planning, contraception, and so on. Again, there are religious implications. This has been a hot potato for IPCC, UNFCCC, and climate reports, and so on. But still, population always gets mentioned, but without discussing all the details such as these, where population reduction is happening already. Even in India, fertility rates have dropped in the last several decades. China has in fact gone from one-child policy to removing it because they have other issues, unintended consequences on older population not being able to be supported anymore because there are not enough young people because of the one-child policy, and so on. So population is a complicated issue, but the main point I would make is that consumption. It's the consumption stupid in most ways. Okay. The second tactic is creating law. Some kind of a global governance and global ethics are imagined here. This is from this paper here that talks about global, regional, national, and subnational issues in terms of the scale of adaptation, global public good, for example, climate-sensitive infectious diseases, food security, transboundary issues like shared river basins. This is a problem everywhere. Low-lying coastlines and heat stress, etc. Level of governance, obviously there are already many entities like UNFCCC we talked about, UNSC, G20, the countries that come together, IPCC, and so on, EU and ASEAN, etc. And the actors involved are international organizations like the United Nations Development Project, Africa Fund, Green Climate Fund, etc., etc. Okay, so global governance is not easy, plus the policies and the philosophy and ethical moral grounds for global governance has to be very clear. What will it be? Is it to distribute the carbon footprint? Will everybody get the same amount of carbon emission per head? Or will it be differentiated somehow? Will it be a guardrail policy saying we will just avoid the most dangerous consequences, or will we actually try to reduce emissions and go towards 2 degrees centigrade targets? And what will that even mean? Because 2 degrees centigrade global warming doesn't translate very well to what happens in your backyard. So going local and getting personal is going to be a problem with global targets. Decarbonization is a clean target where you just say we will not emit carbon anymore, or we'll take out more than what we emit. Okay, and so on. So there are many issues to be worked out as well, but it seems like implicitly and explicitly global governance structures are coming in as a part of the negotiations of climate change agreements. Okay.